Wake up, world. I'm your host, Malik Boyd. Welcome to a special edition of Heart City TV. This episode is really important, not just to the Heart City family, but to many of us around the country who are dealing with the issues of police injustice, criminal injustice at the hands of judges, lawyers, systems. Enough is enough. And it goes not just to protests, but now we have to get beyond the protests into true action. What does that look like? What does real solutions look like for Black and brown people in America? We have been blessed to have an amazing panel put together, individuals who are leaders in their own right, experts in their own right, who will discuss some of the solutions, the frustrations, and more importantly, get us to action steps to get us to where we need to be. Our first panelist, Chad Dion Lassiter. He is nationally recognized in the fields of American race relations and violence prevention among African American males. Mr. Lassiter is one of the co-founders and the current president of Black Men at Penn School of Social Work at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice. He is also the executive director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Chad, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Humbled to be here.
Nicole Thompson. She is a certified school psychologist, educator, author. She is the creator of Diversity Averts, the trauma-informed care training for educators and mental health professionals. Nicole is also a co-author in Black Therapist Rock, A Glimpse Through the Eyes of Experts, recent speaker at the Harvard School Mental Health Conference with a recent appearance in Forbes. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Malik. It's a pleasure.
Pennsylvania State Senator Anthony Williams. He is a Philadelphia graduate of Franklin and Marshall College, the co-founder of Neighborhoods United Against Crime and Diversity apprenticeship program, and founder of Philadelphia and Stopping Crime and Violence and Philadelphia Revitalization and Education Task Force. Senator Williams, it's great to have you with us this evening.
Thank you for having me, Malik. I really appreciate the opportunity.
We have Gerald Givens Jr. next. He's the president of the Raleigh-Apex NAACP, which encompasses over 900,000 residents. Mr. Givens presides over the branch and executive committee meetings, serves as the national NAACP election supervisory committee, and he is the chair of the North Carolina NAACP election procedures committee. He is a United States Air Force veteran of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, retired with 20 years of honorable service as a protocol officer in the Air Force Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Agency. He also happens to serve as the senior advisor to the chairman of the Texas Association of African American Chambers of Commerce in Austin, Texas. His responsibilities are tracking, analyzing, and providing advice on full range of operational policies impacting over 200,000 Black-owned businesses within a 1.6 trillion state economy. Gerald, it is great to have you with us this evening.
Hey, thank you for allowing me to be here with you all. It's an honor to be here on the panel with everyone.
Delia McLaughlin. She is a child welfare advocate, an activist, and community leader. She is a graduate of Lincoln University right here in Pennsylvania. She's a social worker by degree and profession, having worked in social services for over 2 decades, primarily in protection, social well-being, and the development of children and youth. Delia works currently in public education, providing social, emotional, and behavioral health expertise for children and youth, and is actively using trauma-informed care and positioning it from a Black and brown viewpoint. Delia, it is a pleasure to have you with us this evening.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have us all convened, unfortunately, for some of the most challenging situations that we have faced in this current landscape. I want to give first a breakdown of what occurred for those who may not be familiar with some of the basic facts of the case within our broadcast audience, and then we will begin to unravel this thing, unpack it, and more importantly, bring solutions to the table. Here are the issues. The police suspected Breonna Taylor's apartment was being used to receive drugs by a gang based at a different address 10 miles away. One of the suspects was an ex-boyfriend of Miss Taylor. She was one of the 3 people named on the warrant. However, Breonna Taylor was not the main subject of the investigation. Instead, it focused on Jamarcus Glover, an ex-boyfriend, who the family says she maintained a passive relationship. Now, in the affidavit seeking a search warrant for Taylor's house, Detective Josh James wrote that he had seen Glover leave Taylor's apartment in January with a USPS package before driving to a known drug house more than 10 miles away. A judge signed off on that warrant, including a no-knock provision that allowed law enforcement officers to enter Taylor's house without identifying themselves. Now, shortly after midnight on March 13th, Jonathan Mattingly, Brett Hankinson, and Miles Crossgrove entered Breonna Taylor's apartment by executing a no-knock search warrant. Ms. Taylor and her partner, Kenneth Walker, were reportedly asleep as the commotion began. Now, the police say that they knocked before entering, using a battering ram to enter the home. However, this account has been disputed, not just by Ms. Taylor's family, but also neighbors. The officers exchanged fire with Mr. Walker, who was a licensed gun owner, and who called 911 in the belief that the drug raid was a burglary. The officers, who fired more than 25 bullets, said that they returned fire after one officer was shot and wounded. Now, during the exchange, Breonna Taylor, an emergency medical technician, was shot 8 times. She died on her hallway floor. Mr. Walker surrendered and was arrested on charges of attempted murder by a police officer. Now, a lawsuit was filed by Ms. Taylor's family, accusing the officers of battery, wrongful death, excessive force, and gross negligence. Here's what's key to note. No drugs were found on the property. The lawsuit by the Taylor family also says that the officers were not looking for her or her partner, but for an unrelated suspect who did not live in the complex. Last week, in fact, Louisville's city council voted unanimously in favor of banning no-knock warrants. Now, similar legislation that would ban the warrants nationwide was introduced into the U.S. Congress. There are still facts that are being basically exposed and brought to the light around this case. But here is the first point and the first question that I'd like for us to kind of unravel and get into. Chad, how does a Breonna Taylor tragedy happen? I mean, how does an officer receive more punishment for shooting through the wall of another person's home than shooting into the body of an innocent woman?
Yeah, certainly. Can you hear me okay, Malik?
We can hear you good.
Okay. I think one of the things, I think that's a great question, and there's multiple layers to that question. One of the things that we can reach consensus on is that we're talking about institutional racism, prejudice plus power. There are a lot of people who are in multiple spaces, and they see this attorney general and they say, well, he's African American. How could he conclude this? You know, the data's there. He inhabits the African American body, but he does the bidding for white supremacy and the status quo of white supremacy. This can simply happen because, once again, there is a devaluing of this diseased democracy of black bodies, and it always has been. We're always under surveillance and suspicion. We're always being attacked, even in death. We're blaming Breonna Taylor, say her name, for her death. And then when we look at the other side of the color line, when we look at someone like a Kyle Rittenhouse, it's almost like it's journalistic malpractice that we're just calling him a 17-year-old and we're not calling him a domestic terrorist or a white supremacist. And so what we have is 100 or so days, 190 something days that we still don't have justice. And then what's lost in the whole context of this is the fact that this young woman died. And we're looking at the whole notion that we're worried about why are people rioting. And so when you look at two P's, you have property and you have personhood. We certainly don't want people attacking other people, but it's almost like it's cathartic and almost therapeutic. And I'm not condoning the riots that we see, but you ask yourself, after people have witnessed this through multiple lenses, whether it's Eric Garner, I Can't Breathe, you saw George Floyd, there's not only a trauma, but there's a vicarious traumatization. So it continues to happen because, as you in the before mentioned laid out, we have those layers of criminal injustice where you have the AG locked in with the police department, locked in with the coroner. If you look at George Floyd's situation, they blamed pre-existing health conditions on his death and not what the officer did. And Breonna Taylor's situation, we're saying that, the other person, the occupant on the other side of the door had a gun. Those of us who are gun owners, if you came in our house and beat through our door, in Pennsylvania, for instance, we have a, castle doctrine, that you just can't break into a person's home. And then the no-knock warrant and ending, what that does is it's also a piece of legislation that's rooted in institutional racism, right? It provides a covering and a guise for the police officers to do what they do. So we're back at this again with another black body dead at the hands of the state. And then as African Americans, we have to relive this trauma again, or we have to say, we're not talking about all police officers. I don't know anyone that is anti-police. People are anti-police brutality and people are against white supremacy.
Let's talk about that. Senator Williams, from a legislator's perspective, a community leader's perspective, clearly you get a chance to see the fatigue of the community, the city, on a couple of different fronts. How is it that these events continue to happen, and more specifically, continue to happen to Black and brown bodies?
Because America doesn't know its history. Black, and I mean, no matter what we understand now to be the facts, a large part of American history where the stories were not told accurately on purpose. The judicial system and the laws which have followed since slavery have been drafted in a format that was biased towards African Americans, specifically because of slavery. Emmett Till, who was murdered, allowed to be murdered because he whistled theoretically at a white woman, was legally protected. The officers were legally protected. Crack cocaine era. Crack versus cocaine. All of us know now that the laws were written differently based simply upon the fact that African Americans were using crack and whites using cocaine. Stops at stoplight. I mean, the whole system, unfortunately, has bias written into it that even those folks, black and white, who feel like they're not, don't want to be biased, don't want to be prejudiced, are complicit in because they don't know the history of how these things were created. So the reality is that knocking on someone's door in Swarthmore is different than knocking on a door in Southwest Philadelphia, partly because of the law, partly because of culture. You do not hear about those same type of warrants being executed in Lower Marion, Montgomery County, because the culture of policing, along with the law, wouldn't allow for it to occur. But once the law is required to be participated in, the law is balanced against those who have modest income, who do not have deep pockets, who are not rich, and largely that's black and brown folks. So you start with the fact that most of us don't know what our history is, and because we're not studied in it, and the laws get perpetuated in cycles. I mean, so tough on crime, which Donald Trump is running on, is the same thing Ronald Reagan ran on, the same thing that George Bush ran on, the same thing, frankly, that Bill Clinton used at a certain point in time. And each time that happens, it's nothing new, but people don't realize the recycling of history in that process. And so, beyond the frustration, beyond the fear, beyond the pain, we really have to dissect, one, the institutions, two, those who are goodwill and fair intent, black and white. We have to change the laws so that those who are guilty of using their bias and bigotry at work will be found guilty and held to the fullest extent of the law.
It's interesting. You talk about knowing our history. Delia, many of us do not know our history. We believe, quite frankly, that our culture began at slavery for some, which is totally not true. But then we also don't understand our place in building this America, even as flawed as it is, how much it was on the backs of Black and brown folk and continue to be to this day. There is a PTSD, whether we want to admit it or not, that is clearly present in the space as a result. And yes, we're going to get into solutions, but I think it's also important to acknowledge the pain that exists from constant media coverage of Black and brown bodies on the ground at the hands of law enforcement. What is that consistent media coverage doing to us as a community?
It continues to remind us that we're not protected and we're not valued. And specifically, Black women are not protected and valued. And, working with the school system and working with children, young women really don't have the words to articulate and understand what it means, but express how they aren't valued and they're not protected. And media perpetuates it and it is indoctrinated in their cultural thinking about how they see themselves, how they navigate through the world.
It's very interesting because in America, Nicole, and I think many in America are now recognizing that we were sold a bad bill of goods. The justice system clearly does not work for Black and brown, but now law enforcement apparently feels emboldened to address, to treat, even to prosecute us on the street long before we get a day in court. Going to the details of the case, the police, they stated that they knocked before entering Breonna Taylor's home. Now that totally contradicted their need for a no-knock warrant, which allows the officers to enter without even announcing themselves, right? Not to mention, Breonna Taylor wasn't even the suspect of the actual warrant. It was Jamarcus Glover. And so if they believed Jamarcus to be dangerous enough to receive consent to use the element of surprise in a no-knock, why even destroy that element of surprise by knocking? In my mind, it seems like the story was just skewed from the very beginning, and this was just a simple cover-up of either something intentional or severely flawed operations in the police force. What are your thoughts?
So I think that honestly, this is the way that police operate in our neighborhoods all the time. They never give us a level of respect and dignity. We're often pulled over just for driving while Black has happened to me on a couple of different occasions. It's just as soon as they see our Black skin, we are weaponized and they use that against us, and they come up with anything that they know will hold up in court to support the fact that they're using excessive force. And it goes all the way to the schools. I've worked in K through 12 and I've witnessed school resource officers lock kids up, 7 years old and younger, for being disrespectful. And this disrespect is, straight from the teacher's point of view. So it could be as something as simple as the child saying something that the teacher doesn't like, So she calls the school resource officer, and now we have this little child in handcuffs. It's starting earlier and earlier, and it's conditioning us as Black and brown people to believe that we are not worthy of our freedom, and we're supposed to be behind bars. We're still supposed to have this level of slavery and this level of insecurity exist for us in this country forever.
Gerald, that level of freedom that Nicole talks about being so elusive, have we ever really experienced it? Or are we in a manufactured reality that sets us up for almost a matrix-like life? We're able to run around in the fishbowl but never truly experience full freedom. Is that the case?
You know, Malik, I think that was a great way to create a metaphor that it kind of feels like, you know, we're all inside of the matrix right now. But I think you have to go back to what the senator said. It's about history and understanding that it was Virginia who decided that when a Black woman gave birth, that her child was going to be enslaved for life. It was Virginia that decided that, you know, that if a slave master killed an African that was enslaved, that it was justified, that he wouldn't have to face felony murder. It was in Virginia that after slave revolts, they began to start writing new laws and slave codes. In fact, in Stono, South Carolina, which was one of the biggest early slave revolts, after that slave revolt, South Carolina wrote a 58-page law about how to control those that were enslaved. It's about the law. And as somebody who served in the United States military and also who served as a security police officer in the military, I can tell you all that the standards for the civilian police are just too low. You never hear about these type of incidents happening on a military base worldwide. Why? Because the standards are just so much higher. Until we sit down with folks like the senator and a community activist, and we start writing legislation after we get finished protesting, you know, until that happens, things are going to stay the same. We have to show up at these state legislatures and change these laws.
It's interesting that you say that, Senator Williams. It's almost like he kind of threw the ball to your hoop. How do we get laws changed or passed that go beyond common sense? And it's unfortunate that we have to say common sense laws, because one would think that treating someone like a decent human being would just be a part of the operational mandate of a police force or any governing body. But nonetheless, we are here now. It seems like they give us the opportunity to protest. They'll give us all the days we want to destroy our own neighborhoods, but not to destroy the very system by which we're protesting. That's when the walls go up. That's when the blockades happen. That's when the legislative sessions have to go on recess. And then they give us a caucus or a body that will do research and get back to us. How many more times do we have to hear that they're going to research the very thing that we already see every day in America? How do we make that change?
So the first part is, you've heard it 1,000 times. You got to vote. In this country, there's one franchise, regardless of what your status is, black or white, rich or poor, that equalizes the playing field of voting. And many of us in our community have either decided that it doesn't mean anything, because the more you vote, the more people listen. Joe Biden is now on the verge of becoming president of the United States because black people in South Carolina decided to vote, and the congressman, who happened to be the senior congressman in that state, drove people to participate. That's the first thing. The second thing, though, even more important, is after you vote, you got to control the narrative. And so what happened in the 40s and 50s and 60s, black folks voted, but they also controlled their own narrative. That meant that when white people who were quote unquote liberals showed up, they may have been partners, but they weren't defining how we talked, what we talked about, and what was considered to be quote unquote progressive. That was black people like King, Malcolm, Du Bois. I mean, we had our own folks who said this is what we strive for. Right now, in the body and time which we sit, there's a lot of protest, a lot of civil activism, which is wonderful. But that is not necessarily connected to a black politician, which is what it was in the 50s and 60s and 40s. Activists became the elected officials, or they supported those who were there. Therefore, when we said, we want more than a minimum wage increase, we want a shot at the trades. We want to have equity in law firms. We want to be allowed in the medical school. Those things happened in America, despite the fact that all the things we talked about earlier, the challenges and the changing the rules, despite all that, because we voted and we controlled the narrative, we pushed through it. I'm very concerned that today, that yes, we are pushing forward, and yes, there's unrest, but I'm not sure that black people, as a whole, not individuals, are at the table controlling the narrative. Looks like what it will be when we come out on the other side of it. Joe Biden gets elected, wonderful. Harris is now the vice president, wonderful. What does that mean for economic inclusion across the country? Philadelphia, I live in Philadelphia. If you ask me, in a city where the majority population is black, what percentage of the contractors in the city do? It's less than 10%. It's embarrassing. Our police force is less than the majority population. Our educators are less than the majority population. That's because those of us who participate have not made a demand, we're not collectively working for it, and frankly, we're not controlling the narrative. We're allowing other people to do that. So two things have to occur. One, we have to participate in the process. Two, we have to control what's being said about us in that process.
Malik, if I could, I don't want to underscore Nicole's point, because I think it's the most salient point that I've heard. Nicole is absolutely right when she provides the framework that it's a anti-black sentiment in America. There's a hatred for America. I really grow tired of, and I'm not saying anyone on this panel, even though I did hear some of this, I really grow tired of when we talk about what black people need to do. We could be well versed in Naeem Akbar's Breaking the Psychological Chains of Slavery. We can know everything about Jim Crow and Reconstruction. We can know everything about mass incarceration. We could read from cover to cover W.E.B. Du Bois's sociological study of African-American life with the souls of black folk. The reality is that we have two challenges. The institutions that actually permeate all of the conditions for black and brown people, and might I also add white people as well. White people are disadvantaged by white racism as well. So when you talk about what black people need to do, yeah, certainly there's a segment of us that believes that our history started with slavery. Those others of us know that it started with the seminal work of John Hope Franklin's From Slavery to Freedom, the Ghana dynasty, the Songhai dynasty, and the Mali dynasty. But at the end of the day, when we're talking about white supremacy and institutional racism, black people didn't create the conditions that gives you economic injustice, environmental racism, American apartheid, educational apartheid, the violence that we see, the way we couch it as black on black violence, as opposed to looking at the fact that Martin Luther King said the greatest purveyor of violence is my own United States government. And so America is violent, right? Black people kill black people, white people kill white people. People kill one another that they're in close proximity to. So to Nicole's point, it's jogging while black, going to the masjid, going to the church, going to the temple while black, sleeping while black, in Breonna Taylor's case, in her apartment while black. So the reality for me is we also have a black misleadership class that for a considerable period of time have let the people down. Yes, people should register to vote, but it's not just registering to vote. It's registering to vote, it's voter education, it's voting, it's how do we teach people to combat voter suppression, and then ultimately voter accountability. How do we keep the leaders that are in place, or the so-called leaders that are in place, accountable? And so that's what we see across the landscape in these impoverished communities, these colonies of despair. We've had leaders who have been there for a considerable period of time. A lot of them are doing good work, but a lot of them, if we were to give them report cards, they would get Fs. And so for me, I just didn't want to lose that point, that it's not what we should do. We can know every bit of our history. We can know what made me Till said when she was in that lecture room, and when someone said, "Do you forgive? Are you angry at what they did to your son?" And she said, "I don't have a minute to hate. I'm too busy pursuing justice." It's not what we need to do. It's what the system and white supremacy and America needs to do. We can come to the context all we want, peaceful, whatever the case may be. There is a anti-black hatred for our black bodies on the soil of American democracy.
Delia, you heard Chad's comments. If I'm translating this correctly, yes, all the knowledge in the world, all of the considerations in the world, nonetheless, the solution exists within the systems, intravenous systems, which we have no control over. We get the output, but what's internal in this system is even deeper. Would we get change, or is change even possible? Knowing the political climate that we exist in right now, knowing the heart of America and how exposed it has become, is it even possible for change to come?
I think so. I think that there's no loss of control. There are pockets of control. There's a need for a paradigm shift and change in how we teach our children, how we teach individuals who work as part of cogs in the system. I worked for a public agency for almost a decade for the protection of Black and brown children and white children in child welfare, but changing the thinking because people who look like me didn't protect and promote well-being for Black children and brown children in the system. So having control, again, you said back to controlling the narrative, having that paradigm shift of how we provide support and have pockets of system control.
You know, Gerald, there was a major conversation happening across America around Black women, rightfully so, being the most unprotected in the world, not just in the country. We literally watched a Black man protect his woman. She still died. And the media then turned and tried to use him as a part of the reason why she died. Well, if we weren't shot at, then we wouldn't have come that way. Nonetheless, they were looking for Jamarcus Glover, who was already in custody before they even began the search. And so how do we deal with this challenge around what seems to be media, law enforcement systems pitting Black men against Black women, dividing us not just by a bullet, but by media narrative as well?
Well, you know, it goes back to what was being said earlier about white supremacy and understanding that that's a part of the objective and a part of the tools that's used in white supremacy to keep us divided, to keep the young going up against the old, against the light skin, against the dark skin, against the man, against the woman, against the father, against the son, against the mother, against the daughter, to keep us as ununified and disconnected as they possibly can in all aspects and in all activity in our country. And we have to recognize that for ourselves. That's number one. Number two is understanding the reality of the results of white supremacy. The greatest result of white supremacy in the United States is extremism and gun violence. That's the biggest result. This country wouldn't even be formed until Virginia agreed, or not till Virginia convinced the rest of the folks establishing the Second Amendment that gun rights had to be a state's right and not a federal right, because they wanted to make sure that the militias were armed to protect us. And those militias were the root of policing in this country. We have to understand that. You can't, it's like when you go to the doctor. When you go to the doctor, they ask you for your medical history. So we have to understand America's white supremacist medical history. And until we understand it, identify it, determine what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, and then come up and decide on what's the right thing to do and what's the solutions and the ideas, and keep going around in a circle until we get to that more perfect union. As Black people, that's something that we got to take on ourselves. We can't wait for them to do it. It's already been 400 years. That's why Dr. King wrote that book, Why We Can't Wait. It's on us. We got to get it. This is about our freedom. And if we want to protect our children, and if we want to protect our women, if we want to protect our businesses and our schools and our institutions, we got to do it.
Nicole, I'm sure as you're listening to some of this, it's striking a chord. I want to ask you and Delia, as our two esteemed women on the panel, what's the message that you would want to give to Black men who are listening right now?
The message that I want to give to Black men is to be open to therapy. What the nation is failing to recognize as a whole is that this is a very traumatized nation. We were founded on hate. We are built on hate. And those same types of beliefs are still being passed down, especially in the police system. When you think about policing, how it was formed, a lot of the KKK members went straight to go to be policemen so they could get away with the murders instead of just hanging us from trees and having entire families with their children watching these Black bodies hang from trees. So for Black men, I really encourage you to seek mental health treatment because, again, we all need it. But until the Black men, which are the head of our families, go and expand their minds and go against the beliefs that we have been taught as Black people in this country, that we are thugs, that we are sexual objects, and so on and so forth. Get to know yourself for who you are, your godly self. You're a person here, you're here to do something on this earth to help the earth evolve. You're not here to do whatever it is that America has been telling you you're here to do. You're not here to have babies and break the families up. You're not here to sell drugs and go to prison. You're not here to do all of those things. You're here to lead us and bring us forward as a nation, because until we take responsibility for our own mental health, which drives all of this, nothing is really going to change. And it's really important to speak to white men as well, because they're the cause of all of this. So they definitely need mental health, some type of services, implicit bias, and things of that sort in every system level, because it's all across the board. The entire country is ran by that top 1% white male who are known racist, who are known to want to keep us down the bottom and not have us at the table and have these type of conversations, because they know that we're capable of making laws that will, abolish all of these things. So to Black men and to everyone, go get some mental health supports and really go to therapy and talk about what it is that's really keeping you from being your highest self, from really keeping you from accomplishing those goals and dreams that you once set out to do. But somehow, since America has beat you down so much, you don't believe that it's possible, and you just, you're trying to survive instead of thrive.
And I agree with that, Nicole, because that's exactly what I had to do when I was 35 years old. I was at a place that no man in my family had ever been before. I had a house, wife, children. I was working at the Air Force Intelligence Agency, where you had very few brothers in that job. Many times I'm in the room and I'm the only Black person in the room. I was up under so much stress, I had to go to therapy. And I recommend to all my brothers and sisters that are out there, if you feeling stressful, go get therapy.
Delia, you've heard the comments from Gerald and Nicole. What are your thoughts around the message from our women to our men?
So Nicole was in my head because what I was going to say, but to piggyback with that is to support and believe your women. Okay, allow them to say, I am stressed, and support them. Talk to your children. Give them the opportunity to share their feelings and thoughts. We have to move from the mentality of children just as seen and heard. They are individuals and they are humans and they should have the opportunity to speak because that child is going to grow up and emulate and repeat the same behaviors that you are modeling in them.
So there was a comment, Senator Williams, from Tanya Thompson. I'll make sure that it goes back up on the screen. The comment said, or really the question said, how do we know who to vote for? Specifically, our state representatives. As we talk about issues of policing, funding, things of that nature, we recognize it goes beyond the city council or the aldermen, but state plays a major role in allocation of funds. How do we qualify a state elected official or a good one without the ward leaders down ballot, making sure that in many cases we go to the poll with something that just says this is the official ticket, just vote for them because we said so?
So, Malik, you know me personally. I'm a Democrat, but I'm also an independent person who thinks independently. And so solutions become based upon party affiliation. That's the first thing. So, frankly, many African Americans have begun to understand that what they have been taught, and that is Democrat, Republican, pick a side, is not what you have to do. You can pick a side that sounds like you. So when you're supporting someone who's running for office, especially a state representative, they represent 62,000 people, a relatively small amount of folks, especially in the city. It's an opportunity to walk into their office, sit down, and ask for a conversation. You don't have to wait for a press conference or to be a community meeting. You and I have done this many times, met with constituents about my perspective. And I got to correct something. A comment was made about leaders, 30 years or 3 years. Elected folks are not leaders. They're elected people who are supposed to be elected by the people, so they should listen to the people and do what they're told to do. So accountability is a big word that people keep using as if it's like, we're going to hold you accountable. The moment you're elected, you're accountable. If you're not a constituent, all of us are equal in this process. And the most informed voter is one who gets to know their elected representative, either in a campaign or because they're elected to office. And that requires nothing more than a little bit of time on the internet, a little bit more time reading about them, a little bit more time spending time with them, so that your understanding, your perspective is yours. And it may be just one or two items. You want to know, how are they going to support daycare, which are being driven out of business today? How are they going to fight for more jobs in the city of Philadelphia when we are, with all due respect, there are people who I know who vote for a particular administration, and now they're complaining about it. Well, that's the research we do before. So it's a lot of conversation that occurs, and I want to say something that I want to make sure people know. The comments about mental health are central to Black folks in this country today, and I'm so grateful, not just Black men, Black women. I mean, the generation that are modest income, low income folks are in dire need of mental health support. Women who are being put in situations of how to raise children with no man supporting them, and economic challenges, and Black men who think being macho is appropriate, picking up a gun. These are just the starting points of a mental health conversation, but over time and long overdue. So I'm glad we're bringing it up. But that's a policy that you can ask your elected officials, do they support it and how they're going to fund it. So it's not complicated, but you got to take some time to get to know the folks who you're elected.
I think even as we talk about electing candidates, I think we also have to bring in political action committees, or PACs, as we know. Is part of our solution ensuring that individuals who are held to a higher standard, such as police officers, should they be prohibited, their unions, from being involved in politics or contributing to PACs? Ultimately, we see ties of money and donations and support towards elected officials and individuals who are put in position to continue some of the same systemic issues that we're dealing with on a daily basis. Chad, what are your thoughts around that?
I think no matter what your occupation is, you should have an established moral compass and moral imperative. I think the challenge that some of our white colleagues don't understand when we're looking at a white officer killing a black person, some of our colleagues may say, well, what are you saying about black people killing black people? But I think in our community, we expect, and there is an expectation that we look at police to serve and protect, not to surveillance, not to look at us through the guise of suspicion and to kill us. We want the same treatment under the law, so that if we're guilty of something, take us in. Eric Garner, if he was selling loose cigarettes, take him in. The same way that you took Ted Bundy in, the same way that you took Dylan Roof in, the same way that you took Timothy McVeigh in. I think that the senator makes a really strong point. I think when we're looking at activism, and even to your question, Malik, that it's not an either or, it's both and. I think that we need people to be keyboard activists. If they want to post a meme, if that's a form of liberation for them, that's good. We need people to rally. We need people to engage in peaceful demonstrations in the same tradition that produced Martin Luther King and Rabbi Abraham Yahshua Heschel. But if you take in context Senator Williams and myself, he's drafting up the policies, he's enacting the laws. For me, as the person that heads the top civil rights enforcing agency in the Commonwealth, I'm making sure that we implement those. So oftentimes you're not going to see a Senator Williams and myself, and even though you will see us out there, we're not going to be protesting and marching. He's going to be gathering quantitative and qualitative data. He's going to be working with his colleagues to reach consensus to make sure that, you know, the chokehold is banned, that there's a national repository, that if you're an indifferent cop in Pennsylvania, you can't get a job in St. Louis. But I think that we do call leaders to a higher level, and we should. You want your minister, your priest, your rabbi, your imam. You want your teachers. You want your public servants. You want those who work in a nonprofit and a for-profit sector and in the government sector, NGOs, to be people of an ethical ambition, of a moral compass, of a moral imperative. All of the work that you do, Malik, people trust you because they know. And so ultimately, with our police officers, we also, as a community, at some point have to realize that there are officers who are also grieving. They're in the white body and they're grieving the death of black unarmed people. They're in the black body and they're grieving the death of unarmed people. And so the community has to also have a frank conversation. Yes, we certainly want to know who polices the police, but it also is a job in which they lay their lives on the line and oftentimes die a noble death. So we need a unifying moment as well. But that's the way I see it. I think that it has to be a combination of the expectation, and the bar should be set because of the position that you have. You don't want your teachers engaging in sexual harassment of students. You don't want your police officers engaged in inappropriate and misconduct and police brutality. So I think that, yes, we should call our leaders, our elected officials, to a greater level of humanity, and then also ourselves, Malik, and for the panel and the viewing audience. How can I wake up every day and not be homophobic, xenophobic, transphobic? Nicole and the other young lady spoke about toxic masculinity. So how can I heal, like the brother talk about, from whatever my mindset may be as it relates to patriarch and things of that nature? So we start with our own isms, simultaneously working on the system so that we can dismantle them, because they are rooted and rife with white supremacy.
And then we have to understand the equations. You need organized money with organized people and organized minds. That's power. You have to understand that if you got too much oxygen, you're going to burn. If you get too little oxygen, you're going to choke. So you're going to have to balance. If all you're doing is protesting, yelling and screaming, but you're not taking the time to read up on the issues, if you're not taking the time out to write the senator a letter, if you're not taking the time to give him a phone call, if you're not taking the time to to go visit his office, you're out of balance. So you have to balance it out. As a civil rights leader, that's what I have to do. I have to be in balance. I just can't be all about protest. I have to study, I have to be engaged, and I have to interact. And that's what we've been doing here in Raleigh. We've been doing, ever since, I believe it was, it's been so many, that we've been having multiple conversations with our law enforcement officers. In fact, I recently had a conversation with C.J. Davis, the immediate past president of Noble, along with the executive director, and we were meeting with Homeland Security talking about some of the major issues and stressing the point that the black law enforcement officers are calling for national standards. We have to be willing to be at the table and be at the table with an agenda and not just being happy with just being at the table.
It's so
I
interesting,
also
Nicole.
think that
Go ahead, Nicole.
I also think that everyone has their place as well. Not everyone is confident enough to go to the senators and speak to the senators. So that's why you see those people out there protesting. But those that feel more comfortable and are more articulate and more educated, it's those people's job to go and talk to the senators and all, because we always have to go back to the mental health aspect of it all. So if you are, because we know this country is a classist country, so if you're lower class or if you're living in poverty, you already have the mind frame, a lot of times, not all the times, of course, that your voice doesn't matter. And if you go to the senator, they're not going to listen to you anyway. So I don't want to minimize anything that any individual person is doing, because as long as you're doing something, that's enough. As long as you're taking some type of stand, because you won't see me on the front lines all the time. I'll march here and there, but most of the times I'm doing things like this. I'm speaking about it. I'm working with kids. I'm working in the neighborhoods. So we all have our jobs to do, and I don't want anybody to take anything away from whatever anybody is doing. That is their part in this part of our fight for civil rights.
No,
So
you're absolutely right, Nicole. You know, look, just really briefly, Malik, if you look at the whole both and perspective, the George Floyd protests, we can look at that as a global phenomenon where there were young people and they were on every side of the color line and gender line. And that was able to shift the paradigm with getting these Confederate flags, getting these monuments that are rooted in white supremacy. We lost the Civil War to get those removed. So it certainly is a both and that was an eloquent point, because we can't get seduced into thinking that, you know, everybody should be trending in one way. You know, there are going to be times that's why the senator is so profound. You know, when you think about the history of his dad, Leon Sullivan, my pastor, James S. Hall Jr., Dr. Walter Palmer, these were individuals that gave us a blueprint. And so what we need for young people who are out here protesting to understand is that they also have to humble themselves and listen to those who paved the road, so they can understand that the bus boycott, they weren't looting. They shut it down for a whole year. That's an economic boycott. And I'm not, you know, castigating against young people who are out here rioting and looting in the way they're doing, but they have to be able to look at that history and recognize that it has to be civil rights, non-violent protests. But once again, I'm not targeting any individual that decides that they want to engage in the way they want to engage, because I understand that anger and I understand that angst and that outburst. And nobody has ever told us as a people, where should we deliver it once they deliver the verdict that tends to be maintaining whiteness.
And I agree with that.
Can I jump in here real quick?
hold on, Senator Williams and then Gerald. Go ahead.
And I want to amend something. So I agree, everybody has a role, but I'm the old head. So I want to provide some things for all as another generation. My father was a lawyer, graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, really bright man, came from the hood. His chief advisor was a single mom of 3 children, high school dropout, cussed like a sailor, was a woman, broke all barriers. You don't have to be articulate to talk to anybody who's elected. The people you elect should represent your values. The people we elect should not think that they're above us. They should be a part of us. And so, yeah, some people have certain gifts that other people, you know, don't have, and so some may want to meet with an election. But I want to be very clear. There should be no one who feels that they don't have the skill to talk to an elected official. If the elected official cannot translate what is current, what is important, what people are saying, then they shouldn't be an elected official representing those people. And I don't care whether the person never went to school or, you know, went to an Ivy League school. Public service and elected official means that you come from the people, and you can translate their concerns into some level of power. That's their responsibility. And I have, by the way, with respect, I'm in marches today, along with, but that's how I find to be current. That's how I understand what people are talking about. That's how I meet people I disagree with. That's how I reconcile compromise. So I want to understand, you know, the elected process is a dynamic one that should be interactive with everybody on any level. I want One last thing. Be very clear. Black folks today are separated by economics. 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Integration was not as impactful. Different income levels. Pimps, preachers, police officers, all live on the same block, same community. Today, our young folks who are growing up with a middle-class income in the suburbs don't necessarily know the black kids that I represent in Southwest Philadelphia. That's a problem. It's a significant problem. And so I want people to understand tonight, this is about, to the extent that I heard all those wonderful comments about unity, connecting, some work to do to override those barriers, but there should be no one who feels that they're less than anybody else in this process. Nobody is.
And I just want to quickly just say, I'm going to follow up and co-sign what everybody is saying, that you do have to find your roles. And I teach people that there are 4 roles to play in a movement. The first role is the helpers. Those are the people that do the little things that mean a lot. The next role are those that are advocates. They know the policies, the procedures, they know how to work the halls, and they know how to get those things done. Then it's the organizers. They know how to take manpower, resources, and just make magic. And then the last piece are those who speak truth to power. But I teach people that you can't be effective at speaking truth to power unless you know how to help people, unless you know how to advocate for people, and unless you know how to organize people.
So Delia, I know you have had the opportunity to hear the varied viewpoints, and everybody seems to coalesce around this point of a unified message, a unified front, understanding that everybody has their role to play on the road to progress. This question is going to be pretty deep, but I want to throw it your way because I'd love to hear your perspective. How do we begin to build bridges with the community and law enforcement when the world literally just witnessed a murder at the hands of police and received what amounted to be a $12 million my bad?
That was deep, Malik. Because we're hurting right now. I don't want to be friends right now, to be honest. So we have to connect with our people that work within the system, and they can be our bridge. The people who are knowledgeable and have the information to, educate us and, help us through this process and move through it. Because to be really honest, I'm not to be friends with anyone right now. I need time to heal and regroup and come up with better strategies and responses. So yeah, I would say I would have to connect with folks who are already within the system and are able to navigate through it, to connect us. But we need time to regroup and
Well, all right, so time to regroup. You brought up a couple points. Time to regroup, time to heal, and then time to strategize. Yeah. Nicole, it's my personal belief in these current times that we're living in, we're at war. If we're going to be honest about this, right? But we seem to be the only race at war with our hands tied behind our back and one eye taped shut. And I'm not trying to take a shot at any one particular individual, group, or company, but if we're effectively meeting with our Herbalife Connect more than we're meeting with Legal Minds and meeting with those leaders and meeting with those organizers in our community, essentially we're running the risk of being totally ignorant to our rights, let alone knowing which rights are being violated. We're totally ignorant to the resources that are in our community. We're totally ignorant to the power that exists in the legislative power and those that we elect. And we're missing the point. So essentially we're going to war with no protection, no shield, no sword, and no plan. How do we begin the process to heal from this tragic continuation of 400 plus years of impact, but then, to Delia's point, begin to regroup and move forward?
We take some of the power away from the police, just like they've been taking funds from schools, public schools, from as long as I can remember. take some of the power away from the police and invite the police to actually be a part of the neighborhood. You know, police athletic leagues, they were out big when I was a young kid, and you were able to be a part of the community with the police people, and they would play basketball with you. They would come pick you up from your home, whatever the case may be. It is so important right now that the police prove that they're allies, because they have proven to be against us and has proven to be here to exterminate us. So I really think that right now at, you know, a higher system level and all over, that they really need to get us trusting police again, because we never have. You've seen how they've done us since forever. This is nothing new. So we need to build that trust first within the community and outside of the community. And, you know, now I'm just speaking from my own self. When I see a police car, I get kind of anxious, you know, because I really don't know what type of police are driving in that car. Are they racist cops that are going to pull me over for no reason? Next thing you know, there's no more Nicole Thompson. You're saying, say her name. So we really have to build up that trust in the community and with the police officers, so we can start to heal and start to, you know, shift the narrative and start a new process.
So, Senator Williams, this is interesting. In the public integrity unit interviews around Breonna Taylor's murder, which were conducted in March, I believe they were published on July 9th, the police admitted that Taylor had been a soft target for whom the officers anticipated no threat. Now, Officer Manley said that they believed her to be alone on the night of the shooting, and they insisted that the officers not identified themselves. How is it that we can begin to heal when we watch our soft targets who pose no threat end up dead from officers who knocked down the door with a battering ram, guns drawn, looking for someone who wasn't even in the proximity of this location? I mean, it seems that no matter what we do, we end up back of we're alone, we're outnumbered, and we're outplaying. Senator, are you there?
So, background's dark. I'm driving. I apologize. Can you hear me?
We got you.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
We got you good, sir.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, Senator, we got you.
Okay, I'm sorry. And I apologize. My background's dark because I'm driving. I'm driving, so I apologize. But anyway, healing. I mean, healing is similar to grief. It takes time. So when somebody punches you in the face, you don't get up and, you know, say everything's okay. You're still in pain, and pain expresses itself in different formations, and so that's going to be for a while. And I agree with the young sister when she says policing across America has to demonstrate the respect the community that is policing, that the policies, the patterns, the over-policing, the fact that there's cultural differences in policing Swarthmore and suburbs.
Senator, I think we're losing you. So I'm going to go to you, Chad. We just lost the senator for a minute. I want to talk about where he's going, because also Gloria Mayo brought up a very key point, and I'll bring it back up on the screen. Why can't the police the same community? Why do we have individuals that have no idea of the culture, no idea of what's happening in our space, have all the power to indeed not only control the narrative, but control, quite frankly, our very lives?
I think it's systematically designed that way. Years ago, police came from your community. You knew who they were. I think also the notion that we want police to come to our communities, and this is not, you know, anything that Nicole said, but I think the time for police to play hopscotch with our young girls and to hula hoop and jump rope, and then with our young boys to throw the pigskin or cross over and play basketball is gone. I think the days of like barbecue cookouts, swine on your mind, pork on my fork, I think it's gone. What we've done with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission is on one level, we've gone into places like Carlisle, Hazleton, and York, and we've had conversations with those police chiefs. And the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission will be doing some unconscious bias training in those places. Right here in our own very backyard, Malik, with Montgomery County, Springfield Township, we've convened 2 town halls in conjunction with the NAACP Cheltenham branch and Eddie Graham and former public defender of Montgomery County, Dean Bear, and others to talk to Sergeant Pitko about the tensions that young black males and brown males at Carson Valley are experiencing at the hands of police stereotypes and assumptions. Ben Salem just most recently hired their first social worker to go with police officers. A lot of incidences that police officers go to need to have a trauma nurse to talk someone down, maybe because they are having a low because they didn't take their metformin, their rosiglitazone. So for me, I think it's really not starting with police and community relations, but police versus police relations. The blue wall of silence, which is the maintaining of the status quo of white supremacy. The ideology that some white officers want to come forward when they see something, but they have to maintain the status quo of whiteness. Black officers who want to come forward, but they fear that their white partner, because it's almost like a gang, right? If you go out there and everyone is shooting, how do you know that one of your partners is not going to shoot at you? So I think we start with anti-racism training, not diversity training, but anti-racism training in every police department around the country. I think, and then what we also do is, I think officers need to look at D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation so they can understand where that ideology came from. And then I think that officers of all races and ethnicities need to look at 13th so they can recognize what all of us on this panel are saying. We live this experience. We're not making this up. There's an anti-black sentiment in America. There's a hatred, not by all white people, but by the systems of white supremacy, your court, even the coroner. When we die, they kill us. They say, well, you know, we killed Chad, but the outcome was the fact that he was asthmatic because he did this, he did that. That's just too much, right? We're dying, and we have to prove who and what we are and what occurred, and we're dead. And so families are left with the civil remedies, right? So Breonna family gets $12 million, but there's no amount of money that can be placed on the life of black bodies. Stop killing us. Stop killing us. And so we need legislation that bans these things, and we need the highest penalty under the law that will get whiteness attention. When you kill a black body, the same way if a black body kills a white body, you'll do a considerable amount of time. So when a white body kills a black body and it's the state, we're going to sue, but we're not just going to sue. We're going to go for the highest punishment under the law, whatever that is in those particular states.
Senator Williams, you heard Chad's thoughts. I know we lost you on the previous comment, so I want to throw this back to you. Legislation, get it done to add teeth to policies to ensure that black and brown bodies no longer continue to receive this kind of treatment.
And I hope you all don't misunderstand what I'm getting ready to say. Legislation is too slow.
Okay.
I agree. I'm a legislator. I understand the process of compromise. I understand the thoughtful, but mayors and governors and presidents can do sweeping things and sweeping changes. Mayors and governors in particular can affect state troopers who cover half of the state in terms of policing. Mayors can cover the other half of police departments. Police departments in Pennsylvania, frankly, need to change. Many of them are run by the good old boys, and no amount of training or sensitivity, understanding, or exposure is going to change them. Once it's in your system, and you truly believe George Floyd, got choked, and that's a bad thing, but we're not going to do anything about it, you can't change somebody who moves in that manner. They are, unfortunately, affected by their own virus. Pennsylvania has to go through a radicalization through chief administrators hiring new type of police officers. Understand, it's the lowest level of training given to someone who had a gun and paramilitary powers. The lowest level. They don't have to be physically fit. They can be out of shape. A kid running down the street away from them, they can shoot him in the back, say they were scared and fearful for the life. That person needs to be a different type of person today in Pennsylvania. It has to be a person that's tested, validated, certified, and goes to a much higher standard of socialization that we currently ask of our police department. So I don't oppose legislation. I don't oppose the training. I just think it's too slow and too cumbersome, and we should expect more of our mayors and our governor that can change things dramatically in Pennsylvania.
So, Gerald, we just heard literally from a seasoned elected official, a seasoned public servant who said, look, I get it, but even coming my way to the sausage factory, so to speak, it will take too long to make something that has the right flavor for Black and brown folk. And so understanding that, and even with your law enforcement background, what do you believe are some of the next steps that we need to take in the middle of this crisis?
I agree with the senator as well, because about 2 weeks ago, I was surprised when I got an email from the Apex police chief here in our area, and he had pulled down the NAACP standards for law enforcement, and he measured his agency against those standards, and he published those standards publicly, and he shared it and let us know that the areas in which they needed to improve upon, that they were going to do it. And we discussed that in a town hall that we recently had 2 weeks ago with about 9 different law enforcement agencies in our jurisdiction. That's the type of proactive approach that we need from law enforcement leaders so that they can better serve and protect our community. And I also want to let you know, Malik, tonight that you saw your guest, Gloria Mayo. Gloria Mayo, her son was shot and killed by the Raleigh Police Department on January 30th. Her son was shot 6 times by a law enforcement officer, and the officer actually fired 11 times. And it was a situation of a perfect storm. Her son was physically disabled. He was mentally challenged. He was being picked on and bullied. So he went and got a BB gun. He tried to take the BB gun back to the Walmart, and Walmart had a no return policy on the BB gun. He dropped that BB gun in a parking lot, and a white woman saw him drop the gun, and she called the police. Her son went into a store, and he went and did some shopping. He started walking home so he could be home at work before his mother got home. And a police officer showed up, and the distance and the difference between her son being alive or not is the police officer not running 10 yards. The difference was 10 yards. The senator is right. We have to change the standards in law enforcement. That's what we have to do. We can't keep saying that it was Breonna Taylor's life, her losing it was justified because it was lawful. Those two things can't be the same, that her boyfriend had the right to defend himself and the police had the right to defend themselves, and no one get held accountable for Breonna's life, but an officer can be held accountable for shooting bullets into a wall. That has to change.
You're absolutely right. It does have to change. The first thing I want to say to Gloria Mayo, thank you for being a part of our broadcast audience today. The second thing is our hearts and our minds and our souls are out with you in that tragic incident that you and your family had to experience. And unfortunately, it's things like that bring us here. These are some of the cases sometimes that don't make the national news, but nonetheless affect our communities on a daily basis. We even saw on Facebook and some other social mediums about the white man and the black man both carrying assault rifles on the street, and the difference between the white man who was walking with an assault rifle and the cops stopped and said, hey, how are you today? They wanted to take a look at the gun and marvel at the craftsmanship of the weapon. Nonetheless, when the black man carried the assault rifle, they literally laid him down in the middle of the street and were prepared to shoot him despite even being told, hey, we were just doing an experiment. It's not loaded. There's nothing to see here. It's very clear that there is a bias and a stereotype to Delia and Nicole. Has the consistent media footage of Black and brown fatalities at the hands of law enforcement, has that really created a numbness in our communities? I mean, as these cases continue to hit mainstream media, have we become more expectant of footage, but less expectant of progress? Nicole?
I think, it goes, it affects people in different ways. Like now, I remember when I saw the George Floyd murder, I told myself that I wasn't going to watch it, but I wound up watching it anyway. And I was hysterical. I was crying, because it's like, wow, again, another Black person murdered. But some people, it is just like it numbs you, because just thinking about what's going on in our streets and the number of murders that we have here in Philadelphia, a lot of our young men, especially young Black and brown men, are already numb to violence. So when they see police killing us, it's like, it doesn't have as much of an effect on them. So not saying not to put it on social media and all, because we need to see it. We need to know what's going on. That's how we're going to affect change. But at the same time, I do think that there's no need to keep putting publicly putting dead bodies on social media and all. I think at some point you have to be respectful of the family and respectful of how those people are going to feel and their loved ones and all. But again, it just depends on the people, because some people, it affects them every single time they hear another Black person murdered. But then you have that group of people that are just numb to it, and sometimes they are a part of the violence as well.
So Delia, I think about my youngest daughter, 14 years old. I've tried in every way, shape, or form to keep her away from the news cycle as best as possible, even at times changing, CNN or the evening news as I've watched it and recognizing that certain footage was coming on. How do we take care of our young minds? I mean, it's clear that we've got to make sure that they know what's happening in the space, but how do we do that without embedding constantly this barrage of tragedy on video in their everyday life?
I think it's definitely important to have a conversation and use what we like to call, which I will offer, age-appropriate language, right? We want our children to be cognizant and aware of the injustices, the continuous violence on Black people, but we want to put it in a context where they're not one, to be desensitized, and we want them to know that this is abnormal. This is not okay. Individuals should not be hunted and killed almost on a daily basis. And if you want to process those feelings, myself, and even as a mother of a female child, we begin to become very hyper-vigilant when we hear information on the news and conversations with others about these events in the media, but having conversations and processing not only what the event is, but those feelings that are affecting that child, even yourself, and talking about what's the next step. What can we do? How we are emotionally affected by that.
So it's interesting because Leslie Hardy, and I want to throw this up on the screen so everyone can see it. She asked, as you were talking, Delia, what can the parents do to help educate, shelter, and prepare their children to deal with the current climate and culture? Senator Williams, you deal a lot in the educational space. You have been instrumental in ensuring that our Black and brown children have fair and equitable education across the Commonwealth. I'm going to throw that question to you. What can the parents do to make sure that we can prepare and educate and shelter them from this current reality?
A lot, and I have a different perspective. I had two wonderful parents. My father was a lawyer, my mom was a teacher, my dad was in public service. But one of the things they did not do was shelter me from the realities of being Black in America. I was educated about it, so I knew a lot about the civil rights movement. I knew a lot about Frederick Douglass. I knew a lot about Black history, and they provided different experiences which were not traumatic. So I did get to see and go to a swim club called the Nile back when people didn't know Black folks could swim, and I was exposed to travel, but also was brought to sections of the community that actually were traumatizing. I grew up in an era where gang war existed. I took public transportation. So parents, especially Black parents, I keep hearing about the conversation about the police. We need to have a conversation about what it means to be Black, and specifically Black middle class kids. The ones who are surviving on the street need to know there's a greater life beyond the circumstances they see in front of them. But the ones who are growing separate from their brothers and sisters in the hood need to understand the consequence of what they're going through, and we don't have sharing today. Older organizations, urban league, those are bridges to relationships, whether you had a little bit of money or had no money, we were all together. Today, that doesn't exist. And so for me, parenting is the ultimate for a Black person in America, the ultimate for a child, more than schooling, more than any other impactful area. The role model of a man or a woman being a parent, whether you're single or have a partner, it's very, 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 very the ultimate imprint that they'll carry with them for the rest of their lives. But my view is that they should be sheltered. They need to know what all this protest is about. They need to know that when they go to a protest with their counterpart who may not be Black, their interpretation is going to be different than yours. And you need to know the multiple languages we speak as Black people. We don't just speak the common language that everybody else wants to speak. We speak it through our music, through entertainment, through our rhythm, through our daily experiences. We have to share our children. Some of that's painful. So that shouldn't be a daily experience, but you have to share it. And then you have to share some joyful moments. So there's a balance. Because life is a journey, up and down, and I think Black children, of all children, need to be prepared for the up and down that's going to confront them, be it employment, be it marriage, be it finance, be it friendship, be it job, whatever it is. You got to be prepared for it. You got to be a survivor.
And we can't keep sugarcoating things for our kids. Because I'm dealing with a situation right now with a young man who is in a situation, and he thought he was free, and he started speaking freely to the law enforcement officers and letting them, giving them permission to do certain things, and the next thing you know, everything got turned around upside down. And and he really didn't understand what was going on, what was happening. And so we got to explain that to our kids, like my daddy told me, don't say nothing till I get there. We got to have them real conversations with our children to protect them, because they're growing up in a time where the society is more physically integrated, where we're able to go places and do things together, but we're living apart.
So before we go to our last comments from everyone, Chad, I'm going to give you the opportunity to close this particular question out. Your thoughts?
Well, I think on multiple levels, I think that therapy is advantageous. I've been a clinical social worker for 25 years now, and when I was in Ferguson with one of my mentors, Cornell West, I wasn't out. I was like Nicole. I wasn't out in the community. I was at a neighboring church in Ferguson doing art therapy, play therapy, and music therapy as a way of having the young people make matter out of what was going on with the death of Mike Brown, but also all of the chaos that was occurring. I think there are lots of things that parents can do. There are a lot of mentoring programs. I think that one of the things that we fundamentally know is just having frank conversations and age-appropriate language is useful. But it's the same thing as if we had a leak in our house, we would grab a book or we would call a plumber. There are books out there, and I'm not trying to get scholarly, but there's a basic book that's really fundamental by Beverly Tatum, Why Are All the Black Children Sitting Together at the Cafeteria Table? Conversations with parent groups, conversations with mentoring programs, Head Start programs. I think that those are opportunities for us to really talk to our young people. I think also we can start in our various families. We can start with our family. We can speak to our community, the young people in our community. We oftentimes hear the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. Actually, it takes a healthy village to raise a healthy child. And so I fundamentally believe, Sunday school teachers can do this, the imam can do this, the rabbi can do this, houses of faith. And also I'm a respecter of people who don't have the same faith that I have, which is the Christian faith. But I believe that we start in the home. The home should be the first level of socialization, but I also understand there's an economic collapse, there's despair, there's hopelessness, there's unemployment at a staggering number, and then there's the anthology of police brutality against the backdrop of COVID-19. So parents may also be burdened as well. And so I think for the African American community, some of us embrace therapy, and then some of us look at therapy as a taboo. So I would just simply say that you don't have to look at the trauma. You can turn off the television, but sometimes I think you can look at the trauma, and the trauma might ignite and spark in you a level of change to say, hey, I'm going to run for political office, or I'm going to galvanize my community, or I'm going to, suggest to our state legislators, our councilmatic people, a police citizen review oversight board. So I think that there's several things that you can do, but each person has to recognize no matter what we're going through in this moment, there is something called resilient. And I'm not here to preach and say we're going to get through it, but we have to go through. So when Martin Luther King talks about where do we go from here, chaos or community, we have to go through. And so that's the history of who we are as a displaced African people in America. We've been able to get through, and we've lost some people along the way, unfortunately, but still we rise.
Right on.
Time has been well spent, but I do not want to disrespect the time that you have shared with the broadcast audience. I am in awe of the knowledge, the wisdom, the experience that has been shared tonight. I pray that the broadcast audience understands the perspective, the gift that lies in each of you and what you were able to share with us as a people. I'm going to give 60 seconds, which is clearly not enough time. However, I will give 60 seconds to each of you to give your final thoughts. Delia, I'll start with you.
Talk to your children. Allow them and value what they thinking and feeling. Support their right to share information, whatever that may be. Encourage mental health, behavioral health, an outlet, some way to build our mental health and mental stability. I believe it begins in the home. As parents, we need to model this for our children, model our good health practices, be it physical health or mental health. Reach out to our community and system partners to help us in this process. So yes, it does take a healthy village to raise a child. Let's reach out to our healthy folks to help keep building our community.
We appreciate that comment, Nicole.
I would just say use your voice, because again, like I've said, a lot of Black people feel that their voices are silent, or when they do use their voices, they don't count. Know that you matter, and know that the fight that we're going through is here to get us more independence and more into the freedom that we want in this country. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time that we're going through this. It's more like just another civil rights movement. But like Chad said, we will get through it. Stay hopeful. Don't fall in depression. And I know it's really hard during this time. And if you're having hard times mentally, make sure that you go seek help for it. Because your children, if you have children, your children need you to be strong, and they need to be a model for them of what strength looks like and what resiliency looks like.
Truly appreciate those words, Gerald.
And the advice that I give is travel. Go see our country. I've lived in every region of our country. Travel the world. The only place that I haven't been is Antarctica in Australia. And I'm going to Australia because my daughter is attending one of the top engineering schools right now in Australia. I've lived in Japan. I've lived in England. And in both of those two places, I never worried about law enforcement ever attacking me. Why? Because the culture is different. We can change America, because the problem that we have here in America is cultural. It's the biggest thing to change. It's the hardest thing to change, but it can be done.
It's the biggest thing to change, the hardest thing to change, but it can be done. Senator Anthony Blake.
Malik, let me first thank you, and for those who participated tonight, and those who who listen. Mine is a little bit more what Malik said earlier. This is not a civil rights movement moment. This is the closest thing we will return to a civil war. Race has, since they developed an economic system based on race, black folks in slavery or forced labor, this country consistently has been denial they did to those original people they took the land from and those original people that they put into slavery. We've been in that struggle ever since. It's just now revealed itself in the political arena. That means, yes, voting is important this coming year. But beyond that, it also means that people that you think are your friends, you have to push them to do the right thing relative to people like us. That means jobs. That means public safety. That means quality health care. That means quality education. And all those areas are defined and should be defined by the recipient, not the giver. This means the government, private sector should be required to respond to the advanced replacement problem. That happens by collective activity. One other item, just to get on just talking and voting. Get in the streets in some shape, way, or form. Or make people at your job feel uncomfortable. Or your place of worship. Get out and participate. This is a space of true activism. It's a part of a fight. Not a conversation. A fight for what freedom really should look like for all people in the country. Specifically black people. Thank you.
It's interesting. Thank you, Senator Williams. We are not in a conversation. We are in a fight. One of our key punchers, Chad Lassiter, I'm leaving the final comment with you.
Yeah, just once again, Malik, man, I feel very blessed by all of the panelists. It's good to see you, Senator. What I'm going to say really briefly, under 60 seconds, Malik, is not representative of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. So if I lose my job, the senator is one of those individuals who funds my budget. He's going to have to find me a job. But they want a civil war. Well, guess what? We're going to give them civility and humility. This is a unifying moment. I believe what we need to do is, one, the removal of President Trump. Two, hold the Republican Party and the Democrat Party on the federal level accountable. Three, make America confess for the original sin of slavery so that there can be truth and reconciliation. Four, civil rights training. Bernice King was absolutely right when she said that Breonna Taylor is more than a hashtag. We need nonviolent civil rights disobedience training so that our people can know that you don't loot and that you don't burn things down. We need a boycott of structural systems. We need a redistribution of police funding, and we need to improve police on police relations. And ultimately, if you're a person of faith, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves. God bless everyone. Thank you, Brother Malik.
You left us with one of my favorite quotes from that book, Basic Instructions Before Leaving Earth. Somebody's going to get that on the ride home. I'm going to leave you with a comment from my broadcast audience, Leslie Hardy. She said, "Thank you all for this platform discussion and commitment to continue to let your voice be heard and presence known for the advancement of change." I will tell each and every one of you, I am honored to have even the opportunity to witness this platform, to witness your expertise, your wisdom, and your commitment to share with our people. I love, honor, and respect each one of you. If you were not in the position that you're in, the world would be a much worse place. So I'm thankful for all the work that each of you do, and I'm honored that you shared your platform with us. So
Thank you, Malik.
Thank you. So listen, audience, you have heard from an amazing guest, Senator Anthony Williams, Chad Lassiter, Gerald Gibbons Jr., Nicole Thompson, and Delia McLaughlin as well. They left us with so much critical information, perspective, and more importantly, next steps. In fact, Chad Lassiter left us with a list of things to accomplish. Get involved. Each one of these individuals, we will make sure that we post their social media pages, ways to get in touch with them. In addition, we'll leave all the resources that were discussed tonight, from books to organizations to programs and plans We'll make sure that they land on our social media pages so that they can be discussed and shared amongst you in your community. Thank you so much for tuning in to Beyond the Sound of Protest. True justice for Breonna and others begin when we have these levels of conversation, and more importantly, our commitment to making an impact for time to come. I love you. I appreciate all of you. Have a beautiful